as Sharon was just talking to, this idea that we need to embrace mistakes is so critical. It needs to be okay that I'm not there yet and that you are. It needs to be okay that that just means I have more to learn, and I need to be able to name it with those I can statements. It is much more doable to say, I'm still working on I can identify shapes than to say I can't do math. Math is too big, too big. But if I can name it, I can work on it. But this is also mistakes in lessons. How do we embrace that? I was in an Algebra 2 class and watching a teacher teach, and he made a mistake at the board. And I have seen teachers make mistakes at the board and go, and just completely freak out. And I tell them, please don't do that, because what we're actually doing is telling kids you should freak out every time you make a mistake. Just love it. It's okay. And I have seen teachers make mistakes and say, oh, I'm so glad you caught that. I meant to make the mistake. I was just seeing which of you would find it. Okay, let's not tell kids you only make mistakes when you intend to make mistakes. Okay, mistakes just happen. That's how they work. So in this classroom, a mistake was made, and he said, "Huh, that's interesting." And he stepped back from the board and put his hand on his chin and looked at the board and said, I don't think I'm quite seeing it yet. Can somebody help me out? In fact, why don't you guys talk for a minute and just make sure that there's actually a mistake there." And so they chatted and came back, and one of the kids said, well, it's right here. And he walked the teacher through it, and he said, oh, okay. And he erased that part of it and said, well, walk me through it. How should I fix it? And so they fixed it together. And he said, wow, class, that was so great. Because what happens in here when we make mistakes? Now, this was an Algebra 2 high school class. I just want to keep that in mind. What happens in here when we make mistakes? And the entire class, all of them, did this. We learn. And they raised their arms up in the air, and then they went right back to taking notes and learning from the teacher. I thought that is fantastic, right? We are celebrating that we've made mistakes. And I was in another classroom. They were using Kahoot, and they were the little quiz show or the quiz game. And one of the students got the answer wrong. And the teacher said, wow, a lot of you got this answer right, but several of you had this mistake over here. It's one of my favorite, or one of the mistakes that a lot of students make. What I'd like you to do is talk about what mistake a student would have made to get that answer. And those kids dove in. They were so much more interested in talking about the mistake than they would have been if she had said, explain how to do it. But the best part was, a little boy said this, oh, I got that answer. Here, let's just take a look at my paper. We can figure it out. We are celebrating now in the mistake, right? It is a good thing that I've made the mistake. We know that if everything comes easy, you're not learning. If you think back to the countless worksheets that you did or questions you answered about a text that were easy for you, those weren't learning moments. You remember the moments where you struggled, you persevered, you got through it, and you learned. And through that process, there were mistakes. So we embrace those. Those are a good thing in here.
This goes back to John Hattie's work too, because I know this is about instruction and not about necessarily student self-efficacy, but this kind of building of a community of learners, of making it okay to make a mistake and to learn from it, and all those things builds student self-efficacy, makes them realize that they can, and if they can't, they can work through it. And in John Hattie's book, student self-efficacy is something like 1.47 or something, or 1.48. Actually, on one of his lists, and I can't even remember which year it was because he puts out a different list every year, but on one of his lists, it was number 1 in terms of student learning. And it caused him to write in the book a sentence that went something like this: if you want to work on greater achievement for kids, you have to work on student self-efficacy first. Without a student believing they can and they have the ability to figure it out, you're never going to improve academic achievement for kids. I mean, it's so powerful. And all of these strategies really build self-efficacy and also ensure that kids do not give up when they don't get the answer the first time. Instead, they look at it and say, I can do this. I'm going to look at it maybe a different way. And so it just builds that whole kind of attitude you want from kids, a growth mindset. If you want to look at that through that lens, it's the same thing. But I thought that since we had looked at John Hattie earlier, mentioning that that's one of his things is
Mhm.
really, I think, hits the nail on the head.